Gautama Buddha, also known as Siddhārtha Gautama, Shakyamuni Buddha, or simply the Buddha, was an ascetic and sage, on whose teachings Buddhism was founded. He is believed to have lived and taught mostly in the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent sometime between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE. Gautama taught a middle way between sensual indulgence and the severe asceticism found in the śramaṇa movement common in his region. He later taught throughout other regions of eastern India such as Magadha and Kosala. Gautama is the primary figure in Buddhism. He is recognized by Buddhists as an enlightened divine teacher who attained full Buddhahood, and shared his insights to help sentient beings end rebirth and suffering. Accounts of his life, discourses, and monastic rules are believed by Buddhists to have been summarized after his death and memorized by his followers. Various collections of teachings attributed to him were passed down by oral tradition and first committed to writing about 400 years later. Historical Siddhārtha Gautama. Scholars are hesitant to make unqualified claims about the historical facts of the Buddha's life. Most accept that he lived, taught and founded a monastic order during the Mahajanapada era during the reign of Bimbisara, the ruler of the Magadha Empire, and died during the early years of the reign of Ahasatu, who was the successor of Bimbisara, thus making him a younger contemporary of Matavara, the giant Tirthankara. Apart from the Vedic Brahmins, the Buddha's lifetime coincided with the flourishing of influential Ramana schools of thoughts like Ajivika, Karvaka, Jainism, and Ajnana. Brahma-Halasutta records 62 such schools of thought. It was also the age of influential thinkers like Matavara, Purana Kassapa, Makali Gosala, Ahita Kesakumbali, Pakadakakayana, and Sanjaya Belatthaputta, as recorded in Samanaphalasutta, whose viewpoints the Buddha most certainly must have been acquainted with. Indeed, Sariputta and Moggallana, two of the foremost disciples of the Buddha, were formerly the foremost disciples of Sanjaya Belatthaputta. The skeptic, and the Pali Canon frequently depicts Buddha engaging in debate with the adherents of rival schools of thoughts. Thus, Buddha was just one of the many śramaṇa philosophers of that time. There is also evidence to suggest that the two masters, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta, were indeed historical figures, and they most probably taught Buddha two different forms of meditative techniques. While the general sequence of birth, maturity, renunciation, search, awakening and liberation, teaching, death, is widely accepted, there is less consensus on the veracity of many details contained in traditional biographies. The times of Gautama's birth and death are uncertain. Most historians in the early 20th century dated his lifetime as circa 563 BCE to 483 BCE. More recently, his death is dated later, between 411 and 400 BCE, while at a symposium on this question held in 1988, the majority of those who presented definite opinions gave dates within 20 years either side of 400 BCE for the Buddha's death. These alternative chronologies, however, have not yet been accepted by all historians. The evidence of the early texts suggests that Siddhārtha Gautama was born into the Shakya clan, a community that was on the periphery, both geographically and culturally, of the eastern Indian subcontinent in the 5th century BCE. It was either a small republic, or an oligarchy, and his father was an elected chieftain or oligarch. According to the Buddhist tradition, Gautama was born in Lumbini, now in modern-day Nepal, and raised in the Shakya capital of Kapilvastu, which may have been either in what is present-day Talorikode, Nepal, or Piprawa, India. He obtained his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, gave his first sermon in Sanat, and died in Kushinagar. No written records about Gautama were found from his lifetime or some centuries thereafter. One edict of Asoka, who reigned from circa 269 BCE to 232 BCE, commemorates the emperor's pilgrimage to the Buddha's birthplace in Lumbini. Another one of his edicts mentions several Dhamma texts, establishing the existence of a written Buddhist tradition at least by the time of the Maurya era. These texts may be the precursor of the Pali Canon, the oldest surviving Buddhist manuscripts of the Gandharan Buddhist texts, reported to have been found in or around Hadar near Jalalabad in eastern Afghanistan and now preserved in the British Library. They are written in the Gandhari language using the Kharosthi script on 27 birch bark manuscripts and date from the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century CE. Traditional biographies. Biographical sources. The sources for the life of Siddhārtha Gautama are a variety of different, and sometimes conflicting, traditional biographies. These include the Buddhakota, Lalitavistara Sutra, Mahavastu, and the Nidānakta. Of these, the Buddhakota is the earliest full biography, an epic poem written by the poet Asvathosa, and dating around the beginning of the 2nd century CE. The Lalitavistara Sutra is the next oldest biography, a Mahayana Sarvastivada biography dating to the 3rd century CE. The Mahavastu from the Mahasamphikalokottravada tradition is another major biography, composed incrementally until perhaps the 4th century CE. The Dharmaguptaka biography of the Buddha is the most exhaustive, and is entitled the Śramaṇa Sutra, and various Chinese translations of this date between the 3rd and 6th century CE. The Nidānakatha is from the Theravada tradition in Sri Lanka and was composed in the 5th century by Buddhaghosa. From canonical sources, the Jataka tales, the Mahapadana Sutta, and the Akriya-bhuta Sutta, which includes selective accounts that may be older, but are not full biographies. The Jatakas retell previous lives of Gautama as a bodhisattva, and the first collection of these can be dated among the earliest Buddhist texts. The Mahapadana Sutta and Akriya-bhuta Sutta both recount miraculous events surrounding Gautama's birth, such as the bodhisattva's descent from the Tusi to heaven into his mother's womb. Nature of traditional depictions in the earliest Buddhist texts, the Nikayas and Agamas. The Buddha is not depicted as possessing omniscience, nor is he depicted as being an eternal transcendent being. According to Bhikkhu Analayo, ideas of the Buddha's omniscience are found only later, in the Mahayana Sutras and later Pali commentaries of texts such as the Mahavastu. In the Sandaka Sutta, the Buddha's disciple Ananda outlines an argument against the claims of teachers who say they are all-knowing, while in the Tevijavasichagata Sutta, the Buddha himself states that he has never made a claim to being omniscient. Instead, he claimed to have the higher knowledges. The earliest biographical material from the Pali Nikayas focuses on the Buddha's life as a śramaṇa, his search for enlightenment under various teachers such as Alara Kalama, and his 45-year career as a teacher. Traditional biographies of Gautama generally include numerous miracles, omens, and supernatural events. The character of the Buddha in these traditional biographies is often that of a fully transcendent and perfected being who is unencumbered by the mundane world. In the Mahavastus, over the course of many lives, Gautama is said to have developed supramundane abilities, including a painless birth conceived without intercourse, no need for sleep, food, medicine, or bathing. Although engaging in such in conformity with the world, omniscience, and the ability to suppress karma, nevertheless, some of the more ordinary details of his life have been gathered from these traditions. traditional sources. In modern times there has been an attempt to form a secular understanding of Siddhārtha Gautama's life by omitting the traditional supernatural elements of his early biographies. Andrew Skilton writes that the Buddha was never historically regarded by Buddhist traditions as being merely human. It is important to stress that, despite modern Theravada teachings to the contrary, he was never seen as being merely human. For instance, he is often described as having the 32 major and 80 minor marks as signs of a Matapurusa, Superman. The Buddha himself denied that he was either a man or a god, and in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta he states that he could live for an eon, were he asked to do so. The ancient Indians were generally unconcerned with chronologies, being more focused on philosophy. Buddhist texts reflect this tendency, providing a clearer picture of what Gautama may have taught than of the dates of the events in his life. These texts contain descriptions of the culture and daily life of ancient India which can be corroborated from the Jain scriptures, and make the Buddha's time the earliest period in Indian history for which significant accounts exist. British author Karen Armstrong writes that although there is very little information that can be considered historically sound, we can be reasonably confident that Siddhārtha Gautama did exist as a historical figure. Michael Carruthers goes a bit further by stating that the most general outline of birth, maturity, renunciation, search, awakening and liberation, teaching, death must be true.